hospital specialist who'll do a few more tests and scans, have those results looked at, and if you're lucky, you'll then get the right treatment. Even if the condition is relatively straightforward to diagnose, it can take a long time. And navigating that process when you're sick, it can be confusing, it's frustrating, it's an anxious experience, and the longer it takes, the sicker you get. If you have a rarer or hard-to-treat disease, like me, that process can stretch to years. In my case, that took 30 years, and a few more years until my condition could be considered well managed. And during that time, while I was undiagnosed, misdiagnosed, and unmanaged, I was not only pretty miserable a lot of the time, but I was costing the NHS a complete fortune in inappropriate tests, in repeated trips to A&E, and my GP, and of course a merry-go-round of specialists who weren't the right specialist for me. And the parts of the NHS that have begun to change this are those that have shifted their perspective to design their systems from the perspective of the patient. Tower Hamlets is one of the most deprived parts of London, where the social determinants of ill health, unemployment, poor housing, debt, isolation are all around us. For 2 decades now, Bromley and Bow Health Centre has been pioneering a uniquely holistic and tech-enabled combination of integrated medical care and social prescribing. From rolling out telecare and video consultations and self-care like the diabetic care packages, to enabling patients to self-manage their condition, to digitally referring patients for debt advice, language courses and art therapy. This is a shift in focus from just treating patients for the presenting illness to actually helping patients to understand the drivers that impact their chronic condition better, which means that they can play a more active role in managing it. And it's the seamless integration of health tech into their day-to-day practice, which means that the health centre can save precious time in appointments. It means that patients are far more effectively monitored and managed. And it means that doctors have the capacity to be more human. It means that getting involved in health rather than just sickness, supporting and coaching patients in relation to their sleeping, their eating, their smoking and drinking and exercise, as well as aspects of managing their condition properly, such as their adherence to medicine. And the aim is to proactively keep them well, rather than just react when they become ill. And it's also not just about telling them what to do. Because, of course, people who smoke mostly know that it's bad by now, but they need to be truly engaged, providing them with both the information but also with the smart tools so they can properly, closely monitor themselves, having devices that will constantly measure the likes of heart rate, blood pressure, breathing or weight. Indeed, many of us already do that. I daily monitor my heart rate and my blood pressure using apps so that I can titrate my medication. This is my normal, and it is just the same for many diabetics, kidney patients, and many more patients with chronic illness. But in the future, this will also become the normal for many other healthy patients. We're essentially talking about a 24-hour connection between the patient and those monitoring and caring for them. Patients live with their condition 24/7, and our care should reflect that. One study that is thinking about healthcare in this way is the Technology Integrated Health Management Testbed for Dementia. This uses a network of internet-enabled devices installed in a person's home in combination with AIS to enable clinicians to remotely monitor a patient's health around the clock. And it's helping to improve support for people with dementia and their carers so that they can remain more independent in their own homes for longer. Now, the vision that I'm sketching out here is one where, for instance, a GP uses their tablet ultrasound to make a movie of a patient's heart. Companies like Ultromics are already demonstrating solutions for this. When irregularities are flagged, the GP can immediately share that with a cardiologist to diagnose the patient and make a care plan there and then. No need for an appointment weeks or months in advance. The issue can be dealt with in real time. Now, this is what we've all become accustomed to when we book flights or do our finances or shopping online. And I have to say, as a patient who is in the system, I can tell you nothing is more frustrating than the tempo of appointments. To stay on a specialist's list, you have to accept a distant appointment in 6 or 12 months' time in advance when you may or may not be unwell. But happily, it is an eminently solvable problem. Companies like Doctor and others are already being hugely helpful in helping us mitigate the issue, but we're going to have to go an awful lot further if we want to deliver NHS long-term plan commitments to digital-first primary care, to redesigning outpatient care to address this, and of course to embedding AI for diagnostics, starting with the 5 new centres for excellence for digital pathology and imagery, which are aiming to do exactly this, to cut down manual reporting, free up more staff time for direct patient care, but also find ways to speed up diagnosis of diseases. But we know that it can be done already, because in East London they've established e-clinics in order to improve the management of chronic kidney disease and reduce end-stage renal disease. The new service supports timely provision of advice from hospital specialists to GPs, doing exactly what you could do with cardiology, enabling better management of the patient in the community with specialist care where needed. A single pathway has been produced from primary to secondary care with rapid access to specialist advice. Since the e-clinic began in December 2015, 50% of referrals are managed without the need for a hospital appointment, and the average waiting time for a renal clinic appointment has fallen to 5 days, from 64 days in 2015. We all know that patients are still going to need specialists with expert knowledge, but the patient and the specialist don't have to be in the same place at the same time. A network of connected care means that several experts can look at a case simultaneously. It can enable early diagnosis of health issues by constant monitoring before issues become more serious, before patients get sicker. And not only will this help patients, obviously, by reducing long waits for diagnosis, but it also, obviously, frees up clinicians, ensuring that they can spend their time caring for patients quickly rather than waiting on admin and logistics. And even the sickest patients can benefit. In the US, a trial of 766 cancer patients at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in New York tested an app reporting in real time their symptoms and side effects while undergoing chemo. The app allowed doctors and nurses to monitor the patient's recovery and follow up with additional treatment options. And if a patient's side effects were severe or worsening, nurses received an email alert so that they could call a patient to follow up and make sure the doctor reached out to the patient later. In this study, patients had metastatic cancers and were undergoing chemo, so they were very sick. And what came out at the end of the study was that patients lived on average 5 months longer than those who did not use the tool. They experienced a better quality of life. They had fewer visits to the emergency room and fewer hospitalizations. By using what is essentially a simple tool, they removed a barrier to proactive collections and communications about the patient's symptoms. It simply improved communications between the patient and the clinician, because it didn't put the onus on the patient to pick up the phone to the doctor, because patients are reluctant to complain, essentially. These findings are now being confirmed in a larger clinical trial, but it shows the benefit of having a constant flow of information between the patient and the clinician, and it shows that it can genuinely be life-extending. This is going to be normal practice in 10 years. The idea of maintaining people's well-being instead of reacting to an episode, it all makes sense. But we know that it's going to be hard changing the system that is hardwired to be more reactive. But it is how it's going to be in the future. So the NHS is now engaged in one of the largest digital health and social care transformation programs in the world. It's investment of more than $500 million a year nationally, with a lot more spend locally. But we all know that it presents challenges. Firstly, we need to get the basic infrastructure right so that the data feeds AIS in the right format and is appropriately protecting the patient data. This is why NHSX is so focused on open standards, as was set out in the Tech Vision last year, and I know that this has already been discussed from this platform. Second, we need to make sure that staff from healthcare professionals to managers and commissioners, do have the skills they need to feel confident in using or procuring technologies. Otherwise, it's not going to go anywhere. And that's why a lot of work is going on to implement the Topol Review, to support the NHS Digital Academy, and to work with CIOs across the system to raise the capability throughout the system. And thirdly, we of course have to encourage uptake. The average time it takes for new technologies to percolate through the NHS at the moment is 17 years. That is too long. With that pace of technology development, this is not viable. So we need to make sure that once a technology has been proven to deliver benefits to patients or the system, that it will go throughout the system. And that is why NHSX is coming together with the Accelerated Access Collaborative to make a pathway from ideation through to implementation at scale that is more streamlined. That is what Matthew Gould is leading with Sam Roberts at the AAC. And a major step has been NHSX's commitment to creating an environment for innovation to flourish, with products for citizens and staff built by the market wherever possible, with a focus on supporting a system to set standards and raise capability both in skills and in technology. But to deliver this vision, NHS organisations are going to have to buy the technology that they actually need and not just what the market wants to sell them. So the NHSX have three priorities, which are focused on how we can make things better for patients and staff as soon as possible. Because if you get buy-in from the system, things are going to move a lot quicker. So cutting the amount of time that clinicians spend inputting and accessing data in NHS systems will win you a lot of friends. Making it easier for patients to access key NHS services on their smartphone, and ensuring essential diagnostic information can be accessed safely and reliably from wherever a patient is in the NHS. That wins my vote. However, it is not just about improving systems and making more cutting-edge tech available. To be able to make the NHS work seamlessly in a digital age, we also have to think about the ways we use the data. This is another priority for the NHS. It's to create a data-driven ecosystem. It's not only about allowing patients to better access their own data, but it's also about ensuring that relevant clinical, genomic, phenotypic, behavioural and environmental data from across a range of sources can be circulated between patients, clinicians and care systems. A closed-loop system like that can provide actionable advice to people before problems become significant and demand for services can then be predicted in advance. This is a proactive, not reactive system. This is where we want to go. But that's not to say that data isn't already being used in innovative ways in the NHS. There are some examples of outstanding practice, and I know that many of them will have been spoken about already at this conference. And early results from our data-driven ecosystem survey, which I know might have been raised already, show that 51% of those developing AIS solutions are building them for people with long-term conditions, a long-term plan priority, 72% for clinicians, and 58% developing them for the purpose of improving quality of life and experience of care, and 76% to improve the system efficiency. And just last week, I met with an extraordinary group who are working at the Institute for Cancer Research about the potential for AI to improve the speed and accuracy of drug discovery. As part of their work, they've created a database that uses AI to discover the cancer treatments of the future. Their system is called CanSAR. It's the biggest disease database of its kind anywhere in the world, with almost 5 million experimental results. It's freely available to help researchers worldwide, and it's already driving dramatic advances in drug discovery to identify 46 potentially druggable cancer proteins that have been previously overlooked. This is the level of opportunity which is out there, and we have a responsibility to capitalise on those opportunities, ensuring that we don't miss our chance to save lives and money. But to do it, we have to make sure that we do it in the right way, within standardised, ethically and socially acceptable frameworks. The fair and ethical use of health data by researchers and commercial partners can deliver better patient outcomes, improve safety and contribute to a thriving economy. But while we promote the latest data-driven scientific advances in healthcare, we have to ensure that patient data is respected and properly protected, and because that is the only way that we will maintain patient and clinician trust. We must have their buy-in if this is to continue. Getting the foundations right matters hugely, ensuring that we can go forward. Last December, we published 5 guiding principles for the use of NHS data, along with plans to establish a national centre for expertise that will provide NHS organisations with the highest quality commercial and legal expertise. We've road tested and developed these principles and plans for the centre in partnership with a wide range of stakeholders. And this really matters because in that survey that I mentioned earlier, 62% of those who completed the survey said that they were using personal data to develop their AIS systems. 49% got access to the data from NHS acute hospital trusts, but only 38% believe that the trust is the data controller, and nearly 30% of responders didn't know what type of commercial arrangement they had in place. This demonstrates that there remains some confusion out there about what framework we need to have in place. So this is why we've put some basic rules of the road in place. It is why we're testing them with a range of stakeholders, and that is why we have put in place plans for a centre in partnership with a wide range of stakeholders across the NHS organisations, academic research, medical research charities and the life sciences industry. We're going to publish an update and next steps on this work shortly, and ahead we're going to have a full policy framework for data sharing partnerships later this year. This is to establish certainty so that people can go forward in the full knowledge that they can innovate and they can invest in confidence about what the rules of the road are. I'm delighted that we're going to be able to work with real experts in this space, including Natalie Banner from Understanding Patient Data, because they lead on phenomenally important participatory research designed to ensure that the ecosystem we're creating keeps society in the loop by making use of research methods that keep people regularly engaged throughout the design process. And I'm really looking forward to having a discussion with her and hearing about how we in the centre can learn from her expertise and that of all of you here about how we can ensure that we maintain public and clinician trust as we do move forward to a data-driven future, one that is more proactive and not reactive, because I know that each and every one of you here does believe, as I do, that data can save more lives, and I know that all of you also want to play your full role in doing that. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicola. Now, it takes me great pleasure as well to invite to stage the lead for Understanding Patient Data. Some of you may not know what that is, but you'll hear plenty about it later. They are a branch of the Wellcome Trust, something like that. So, Natalie, can we welcome you to the stage, please? And in true sort of CogX style, we're going to have what we call a fireside chat between Natalie and Nicola. And then if we've got time at the end, we'll open the floor up to some questions. So over to you.
Thanks very much, Indra. Thank you for the introduction, and welcome everyone. Fantastic to see such a packed stage. Thank you very much indeed, Baroness Bruckler. I hope your voice holds out, because there's plenty to talk about. So as Indra said, my name is Natalie Banner. I lead an initiative called Understanding Patient Data, which is hosted at Wellcome. I think that's the way we describe it. It's technically an independent initiative, and our role is to talk more about the way that data that's collected in health records can be used for research, and we'll come on to talk a little bit more about that later. So Baroness Bruckler, thank you so much for that fantastic vision. It's such an exciting time, and I think anyone who's been wandering around the conference will see just how much buzz and excitement there is about the potential for data and new technologies to really drive differences, make an impact in society and change lives. But I just wanted to start off asking you about your own journey and experience. You spoke just now about the diagnostic odyssey that you faced in understanding, learning about managing your own long-term condition. I know that both your parents worked in the NHS as well, so you had a lot of sort of experience with the healthcare system. And I just wanted to ask you how you feel those experiences have shaped your views on research and innovation, and your priorities as a minister.
I think the clear way in which that's shaped my experiences. I see everything from a patient's perspective, inevitably, and every time I look at a policy that comes across my desk, I think, will this get patient and clinician buy-in? Because if it doesn't have patient and clinician buy-in, I know that it's just going to be a dusty policy document that sits on my desk. Maybe NHS England will back it, but then it will just stop at the door and it won't go anywhere. And so that's the first impact that it's had. The second thing is that I know that as a patient, the frustrations that I've had in not being able to access my own medical records, in the paucity of research because data can't be shared, because doctors feel like they aren't able to share records sometimes because of urban myths, sometimes because of actual legislative barriers about data sharing, because of the legacy which we have because of care.data and what the political battle which we had to overcome it. And so it brings, I suppose, a personal mission to the way in which I engage with the health data policy area, because I know that this isn't about just getting the lines right in my department. This is about actually saving lives, but it's also about transforming lives on a smaller level. If you just want to get your if you just want to go to get your prescription and you have a barrier in getting your prescription, that can actually create, that can make you sick in a way that wouldn't be the case for somebody who doesn't have a serious illness. And so I suppose I have just more granular understanding of that.
Yeah, for those of you who might have been here a couple of days ago, on Monday we had a fantastic panel of patients, and we were talking about how to sort of make the development of medicine and technology more patient-centric. And we had a great keynote speaker, Jess Mills, who was the daughter of Tessa Jowell, and who's founded a fantastic charity, Act for Cancer. And something that she said really struck me. She said, most patients, they want to get back to their ordinary lives. They don't want their lives to be dominated by having to manage all of these things, whether it's prescriptions or appointments, as you pointed out. So I think that's such a powerful notion to kind of to hold on to.
I think as well, at a certain point, you start giving up. You start giving up trying to navigate your way through the system. And there was a moment in 2016, it was that recent, when I was really sick, and I was fainting pretty much every day because my blood pressure and heart rate was so unmanaged, and no one had managed to work out how I could titrate my medication. And I'd been put on, I'm on off-label medication, so there's no right amount that I should take or any individual should take. And because I was taking the wrong dose, for me, as it turned out, I was just on the wrong amount, and I kept trying to get back to my specialist, and my GP didn't feel confident in prescribing for me, and I almost just stopped taking everything, but I knew that would make me sicker, and I felt completely boxed in, because as a patient, you don't have anywhere that you can go. You can't access your specialist because it's 6 months or a year to get to your specialist, and your GP doesn't feel confident because you're on off-label medication, and they can't get you in any quicker because you're in a very rare specialty. And so you then have to make a judgment. Is it better to take the medication and be sick from the medication, or is it better to change the medication? And my solution was tech. It was monitoring the effect of my medication on my heart rate and blood pressure and titrating accordingly. And in the end, I as a patient took control of my condition and managed to resolve it. Now, I don't believe that should be the case. I don't believe that I as a patient should have had to resolve that. I think we should have been able to have a system where I should have been given the information and the tools to be able to manage that much more effectively, much earlier. And that is why, as I set out earlier, if we give patients the information and the smart tools to manage their care earlier, if we can diagnose patients earlier before they get sicker, we will be able to be proactive, not reactive. And we will not have patients in the situation where I was in, where I was literally experimenting with my drug regime.
That seems so shocking in this day and age that's where it got to, and presumably, as someone who's quite digitally savvy, quite engaged with this, that was probably an easier process for you than it would be for many people who perhaps aren't, whether they're not online or not, familiar with using smart tools and technology and so on. How do you feel that we can ensure that this kind of technology and the potential for this sort of technology can actually spread it across the population, particularly to those people who might not otherwise be engaged with technology, with smartphones, with working online and that sort of thing?
Well, one of the things which I'm really excited about is the work that Indra is doing with NHSX, and also the work that's going on at AAC, where we're literally going to go out and we're going to search the examples of best practice up and down the country, and pull them out and spread them across the country, because we've worked out that there are some places in the NHS that are doing an outstanding job, places such as Tower Hamlets, where I wouldn't probably have been in the position that I was in. And we're going to identify those examples where they have been proven within the system, and we're going to find ways to spread them throughout with using our AHSN network, using other ways to make sure that we drive innovation through quicker than 17 years, and ensure that we can give patients the technology that they need, but also give them the information that they need so that they can feel empowered. And we're going to make sure that we put patients at the centre of that innovation process. And that's one of the reasons that we're excited about the Centre for Expertise.
Absolutely. There's a huge amount of buzz around technology and AI and healthcare and so on. And you've spoken fantastically about some of the brilliant examples, the sort of pockets of innovation that are happening right across the country. But can I ask, what's the thing you're most excited about for the next couple of years in terms of technology and healthcare? Is there one thing that you'd pick out?
I was really absolutely overwhelmed by my visit to the Institute for Cancer Research and the work that they're doing, where I really do feel that they are going to cut down dramatically on the clinical trials process, and we may well see transformational cure-like cancer drugs coming down the road, but at a much lower price, and that's really exciting. But that will, of course, those processes will, of course, transfer to many other areas, and that's really groundbreaking. That was a commitment that we made in our life sciences strategy and sector deal to look at the opportunities which that presents. The second area, which I think is going to be hugely transformational, is AI for radiology and pathology, to speed up diagnosis and screening, which will mean that we'll be much more able to spot disease earlier and intervene more in terms of risk profiling rather than in terms of responding once someone is sick. There's a lot of work that we're doing in terms of our genomic program. We really lead the world in terms of genomics, where we really are the only place in the world where our research in genomics and sequencing actually feeds into clinical care. And we are rolling out across the NHS a genomics medicine service, so that at the moment 1 in 4 rare disease patients who are participants in that are getting a diagnosis for the first time. This is groundbreaking, it's extraordinary and exciting. But what would be even more exciting is where healthy participants could start having risk profiling, and really quite early science is coming through that polygenic risk scores and areas like that could be used alongside other forms of risk scoring in order to identify risks quite early on, and we could use that as a form of screening. And so there are some emerging forms of screening, which mean that we could start becoming really a much healthier nation, and we could really start addressing the demand on the system, so that those who do have genetic diseases, who will be sick, will actually be able to get the personalised care within the system that at the moment it's really challenging to give them.
Yes, and I think with genomics, the promise of personalised medicine has been around for quite some time. People have been talking about it for quite a few years, and there's the different P's, which I always forget. It's the personalised, predictive, I've got noted here, preventive and participatory, which I think is the interesting other P. You mentioned, you trailed the National Genomics Strategy at Rare Disease Day early this year, and I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit more about your plans for that, and where you see the role of government in taking steps to really drive forward the potential for personalised medicine, particularly around genomics.
Well, one of the really exciting things when I started this job for a second time, because obviously I was a minister before, and I came back in and I saw we've had a huge flourishing in genomics, and we've not only got Genomics England, which does the main sequencing with the NHS, we've got UK Biobank, which is an extraordinary research facility with longitudinal and phenotypic and genotypic studies, but we've also got a huge number of other projects that are going on, as well as the private sector. And what I felt was we needed to just make sure that everybody was pointing in the same direction, and that we were clear what our aim was with genomics as a nation. Not only so that we made sure that we sent a clear signal to researchers and innovators about what we were doing, but also so that we were clear with patients and clinicians about what our ethical standards frameworks were, what our public-private data sharing frameworks were, and so on. And so one of the key priorities for the National Genomic Strategy is to set that out very clearly. And for me, one of the priorities is we need to make sure that we maintain this really outstanding homeostatic cycle that we have in genomics of research into clinical care and back again, because that is our outstanding strength in genomics. The second thing is to make sure that we are always clear that what we want to get out of genomics is not a lot of data and a lot more data, but functional data, where we can actually take action and go forward with taking action, because it's great to find out more and more from genomics, but what we actually want to do is improve care for patients, and so that will be the direction that we're going in, and what I really want to make sure is that we maintain patients at the heart of this, that we have a clear participatory group in the middle, just as Genomics England have led the way on, in fact, that we have clear methods for consent and standards for data sharing, and that we have, we leverage our world-leading ethical and legal institutions in making sure that we think very carefully about where we're going, because this is an area that very few nations have thought carefully about.
Absolutely, and you mentioned sort of public-private partnerships there, and of course, we're here at a tech conference. There's huge amounts of innovation. There's an awful lot of commercial interest in the NHS and in the potential for using and developing new data-driven technologies within it, and so on. And I think the NHS, and I think it's fair to say public perception of the NHS has a slightly uneasy relationship with industry. People are anxious about the role of commercial interests, and particularly when it comes to the use and sharing of data that's collected in the NHS and data in health records. There is a low level of trust, and there's a lot of anxiety about what people might be doing with the data, where it might be going, what the rules are, and so on. And so I just wanted, and you mentioned Memorial Sloan Kettering, which on the one hand has these fantastic examples of what they're doing, but there was also a huge backlash when it was discovered that some of the directors of that organisation were potentially going to create a new company that could use the scans that they had built up an archive over many, many years. And there was a lot of anger that was sort of seen as potentially being slightly exploitative. And so I guess as a Minister for Innovation, how do you negotiate that very, very difficult terrain of enabling and ensuring innovation, and that the NHS is available to as a kind of test bed, and to really get the best cutting edge new technologies and so on, against this anxiety and concern about public trust, and trying to ensure that we actually do get sort of buy-in from patients and clinicians as well for the technologies that are being developed?
Well, I mean, one of the things is that having been in government for a very long time, I mostly have learned that it's almost never conspiracy, it's mostly always cock-up. But the problem is that you need to make sure that everybody else knows that as well. So the first thing is to make sure that you do genuinely talk to people and engage with people. I have spent a lot of time engaging with representative groups, but also actual people, which I think matters quite a lot. So going out on visits, but also talking to those who really know what they're talking about, because obviously while I am a patient and have a certain kind of professional patient experience, I'm not an expert. So knowing who the experts are and getting the advice, that matters. Secondly, consulting and being transparent and open about your process as you develop it, rather than sort of just dumping your policy on people after you've developed it, and not allowing people the opportunity to engage as the process is developed, because actually with the best will in the world, even if you are trying to do the right thing, you often miss things. You can't be all-seeing, all-knowing. And so having a co-production process is really valuable as a government, because it makes it better. And so we do that. The next thing is having clear, transparent rules of the road, because it works for us, and it works, I think, for industry. I think it works for investors if everybody knows what the rules are, and they're then enforced clearly and with certainty and consistently. And that's why we brought in the AI Code of Conduct, which was developed in exactly this way, in an iterative way. That's why we're bringing in the data principles to make sure that public-private engagement on data is going to have a clear set of codes, and we're doing this also in an iterative way. And we're going to keep doing this to make sure that everybody understands what the rules are, how they will be enforced, but everybody also engages with us on how we develop it, to make sure that we don't build in unintended incentives or disincentives, because that's not what we're trying to do.
Fantastic. So there are some really brilliant examples, as you've said, going on all across the country. And you've talked about the desire to sort of identify what's happening there and see if it can be scaled or expanded and rolled out further. What are the sort of key challenges and barriers you think that exist at the moment? Because obviously there's huge energy and there's huge enthusiasm, and it seems like there's a lot going on. But what's kind of holding it up at the moment, do you think?
Well, I think we've done a lot in terms of the regulatory space, and we're doing a lot in terms of clarifying what the rules are, and we're making a lot of progress on that. I think the key barrier at the moment is the NHS being low and slow on uptake, and that's why we've done the work that we have in terms of putting in place NHSX and the AAC in order to address that. The barriers, I think, are in terms of infrastructure, capability, and investment. On the first two, I think that we are doing an awful lot in terms of addressing that. Obviously, we've put in place the NHS Digital Academy to raise skills, and NHSX is going to be doing a lot to try and raise capability in terms of procurement by having individuals in there who have commercial expertise to assist those within trusts when they are engaging with industry in terms of just raising their confidence in making deals, because sometimes it can feel quite stressful if you're going to take a risk on bringing in a new innovation when you may be facing a risky winter. You may not feel like you have much capacity, and if you're going to change your vendor, you might think, oh, I'm just not sure I can take that risk this winter. So you might just feel like you need to have a bit of support. And so NHSX is going to be part of that support network over the next little while we raise capability across the system. The GDE process is also part of that, but NHSX is we think, going to be a game changer in this area. AAC is also going to be looking at procurement processes, is going to be looking at proving evidence, because one of the real frustrations, we think, is that you have to go and prove your case 209 times in every CCG. You shouldn't have to do that. And so these barriers are things that we're looking at really closely to see how we can smooth the system and make a much more seamless approach to going through the regulatory process and to market much more effectively, where you have proven that the NHS wants your product. You have to prove that bit, sorry. We can't do that for you.
It's interesting you talk about risk aversion, because I think that's something that, with understanding patient data, we've come across very, very clearly, this idea that, well, we want to engage with patients and it sounds like a good thing to do, and everyone sort of nods and agrees and says, oh, it's terribly, terribly important to engage with patients, but then actually doing it in practice, there's a huge amount of nervousness around doing that, and actually just going out and talking to people, as you say. So I think it's a really interesting challenge, both in terms of the kind of the practicalities of procuring and understanding technology and getting those bits right, but also if you're serious about the public trust bit, actually going and talking to people and figuring out how to do that engagement, where you're going to have a diversity of views. You're not going to get complete agreement. People have different levels of willingness to take on risk and to sort of be open to the idea of potential commercial incentives in the NHS and so on. You're going to have a huge amount of diversity. How on earth do you manage that when it comes to having to then make a policy decision? So you do the engagement and it's brilliant and you get lots and lots of interesting views, but then you actually have to translate that into actually deciding on some rules. How do you manage that diversity of views?
Well, you make a judgment based on all the various information which you have. But when it comes to public trust, trust is earned. And it's a process, and public opinion is dynamic as well. It changes over time based on experience. We've looked at evidence, and you have shared this evidence with us as well, that patients are much more keen to share health data when they or a family member have been sick, and will be likely to engage in participatory research in that situation. And so we can't put people into buckets of, this person is willing to share health data, this person will be willing to be engaged in commercial activity. People aren't like that. We change our minds. And so the point is that as a government and as a sector, we have to earn public trust that we are going to use health data for the right purposes and that we can be trusted with what we will do with that health data going forward. We have to earn clinician trust that the way that we engage and we build this ecosystem will work, that it will be competent, it will be effective, that there won't be risks, that there won't be data losses, that there won't be breaches, that the security will be built in. That is part of the purpose of putting in place the Tech Vision's interoperability standards, the cybersecurity standards, so that people can look at that and they can have confidence that these will be the standards that the system will be built to. And as this develops and as the process goes, more and more confidence will be built in it, and we will earn that trust from the public. But I don't think that that is a static thing. My personal view is you have to keep earning public and patient trust, and there will always be incidents. There will always be issues that arise that you have to explain, that you have to take responsibility for, and you have to accept the fact that as a sector we are responsible for dealing in something which is extremely precious and extremely personal. It's people's health and their most personal information, and if we are going to deal in that, then we have to accept that we are going to have to respond to a demand to be accountable to the public and to clinicians as to the standards and the interoperability which we are going to meet. And that is the business which we are all in.
Thank you, and it's something we're very much looking forward to working more with you on, with understanding patient data. Our aim is to try and make the way that data that's collected in health records, how that's used for purposes beyond care, more visible, more understandable, and more trustworthy. And I think this is certainly a very opportune time to be working in this space and really helping to drive those standards and that vision for a future which I think we can all agree sounds fantastic if we can get it right. So I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank Baroness Blackwood for using the very last of her voice to talk to us this morning. I think you'll all agree it's been a fascinating discussion, and thank you very, very much for your time. Will you join me in thanking Baroness Blackwood?
Great, thank you so much. So we're going to wrap up this session now. I think, Natalie, will you be around for questions?
I will. Yes.
Yep, so they've got some space around there if you've got any questions. But do hang around. We've got some fantastic speakers coming up at 11. Lots of you have come and asked us about data. How do you access data? What's the NHS doing with data? So we've got the wonderful Caroline from HDR UK coming to tell us a little bit about that. And then after the break at 12, at 12:30, we've got some real-world examples of where people have made partnerships with the NHS, so industry and the NHS in partnerships doing real AI solutions. So do hang around for those as well. So thanks, everybody. everyone, I'm loving the buzz in the room, but we've got even more fantastic speakers. So, could I ask everyone to take their seats, please? Great, thank you. So, as promised, we're now going to talk a little bit about data. So it takes me a real pleasure to invite the fantastic Geraint, who is our Chief Data Officer at NHSX. Over to you, Geraint.
Thanks, Indra. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this session. In a moment, I'll be introducing you to our fantastic panel, but I was asked to give you a very quick few words about NHSX and what our role is within it. I'm a public health doctor by background, and I'm the Chief Data Officer of NHSX. For those of you who aren't aware, NHSX is a new joint enterprise between the Department of Health and Social Care and NHS England. We definitely got the flavour of the month with the letter X and CogX, but in our case the X stands for the user experience. So our raison d'etre really is to improve the lot of patients and staff, the end users of technology. What's NHSX's role in relation to AI? Well, my colleague Anna describes it as a bit of a dual personality. So on the one hand, we're there to champion AI. On the other hand, we're a bit of a damp squib, as she put it, which I thought was a bit harsh. What does she mean by that? Well, we're very much there to champion machine learning and artificial intelligence. I'm probably one of the biggest fans of it. I think we're on the cusp of something quite remarkable. For those of you old enough to remember the late 1990s when people were starting to talk about this thing called the World Wide Web, just look at what's happened since then, and I'm getting deja vu to a large extent on that. One of the things for me is how AI is not just going to replace humans, but rather to do superhuman tasks. I don't know how many of you use Google Photos, but if you use Google Photos and you enable the facial recognition element of it, it's quite outstanding. I could show you some photos from my Google Photos album of photos of me as a toddler and my sister and my niece and my nephew. If I'd have brought them here for you, I'm sure you would have struggled to work out who's who, whereas Google just automatically picks them up. It's quite scary in a way. What's that got to do with healthcare? Well, in healthcare, we often use imaging, CT scans, for example, and may have to inject what's called an IV contrast into the patient in order to show things up on that image. That's not without risk. Some patients can have an allergic reaction to it. The exciting thing about AI is sometimes it doesn't need to have that contrast because it can pick up things that the human eye wouldn't be able to do. So that's the kind of championing element of it. What about the damp squib? What do I mean by that? Well, there's enormous potential for AI, but we need to do it carefully. And so part of our role is to think through the ethics of it, the information governance and the safety. So, for example, everything we do needs to be compliant with the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, and with the Common Law Duty of Confidentiality. When it comes to ethics, we need to be very, very cautious. So whenever AI is making a prediction, sometimes that prediction will be incorrect. And we need to be really careful that what is called false positive and false negative results don't cause more harm than good. And then finally, in relation to safety, many of you, I hope, will be aware of the new Medical Devices Directive, which comes into force next year. So we all need to be really mindful of that and make sure that we're abiding by the law. So NHSX, I hope, is going to try and strike the right balance between the excitement and the note of caution. Just going to give you a quick flag of a few of the things that we're doing in this space already. Probably the most important is the AI Code of Conduct, which Indra has worked on. Do have a look at that if you haven't already. We've got 10 guiding principles on there, but they're very much just a starter for 10. And so we're looking forward to consulting more widely on that later in the year. My team are developing what's called an IG framework for integrated care. So one of the problems with the NHS is that it sometimes behaves like the world's 5th largest organisation, but sometimes behaves like 8,000 or 9,000 separate legal entities, and trying to navigate that and getting the data flowing between them can be a major headache, but we're hoping with this new framework on IG that we'll be able to help make things easier on the ground. That's part of a bigger package of work to try and simplify and rationalise and modernise information governance. Those of you who've worked in the NHS will know that when you mention the letters I and G one after the other, you instantly get people rolling their eyes out of frustration. Part of my role is to try and do something about that and make people see IG as something positive and helpful. A little bit how health and safety gets a bad rap, with all the people think that health and safety's gone mad, but if you look at the improvements in mortality from accidents over the last 30 years, it's quite dramatic. So hoping to have a similar revolution in IG. We've got a big range of initiatives to try and improve access to data. So the new digital innovation hubs are going to be launched later this year, the first 4 of those, quite exciting. That's part of a bigger piece of work to define the future architecture for how NHS data should flow around the system, so keep an eye out for that one. And then finally on transparency, you'll be aware that the Secretary of State published his credo in relation to data and tech last September, I think it was, and we are in the process of developing an annex to that document which sets out his vision for improving transparency of data. So on that note, I'm delighted to introduce Caroline Cake. Caroline is the Chief Operating Officer and Deputy Director at Health Data Research UK, HDR UK, which is the National Institute for Health Data Science, and they are the masterminds behind the Digital Innovation Hub programme. Caroline is responsible for developing the strategy and running the organisation and the digital innovation hubs. She's a chartered engineer by background. She started life working in the electronics and chemical industries before becoming a management consultant. She originally worked for McKinsey and then for the last 12 years as part of the leadership team at 2020 Delivery. So please, with a big warm round of applause to welcome Caroline to the stage.
Thank you, Garrett. So lovely to be with you all here today, and I'm going to be covering 3 different things in the talk that I'm going to give, a brief talk just before we get into the group discussion. So what I wanted to cover was 3 different areas. First of all, to introduce you to Health Data Research UK, and secondly, to talk a bit about health data science and what it is we're doing at Health Data Research UK to bring that to life. And then the third part to talk about us, the people, and the public, and how this all affects us and how we can get involved in it. So I think if I click forward, yes, it works. So first of all, this is just setting out about Health Data Research UK and what our mission is, which is to unite the UK's data to enable discoveries that improve people's lives. So this fits very nicely with the conversation that Natalie Banner and Baroness Blackwood were having beforehand. It's about how we have this extraordinary data assets, but how are we actually using them to make a difference to people. Our longer-term vision, then, is about actually how you can use this large-scale data and advanced analytics, so including AI, machine learning, to actually benefit every patient interaction. So it's making sure that every intervention you have with medical care, with how you even think about your own healthcare, is actually informed by healthcare data. And what this is going to entail is actually 3 different things. So this is what... I'm not moving forward. There we go. That helps. So it's going to entail 3 different things. So we've got the science, which is around, we've got 22 different universities that are part of Health Data Research UK, and they're doing all sorts of exciting science, which I'll talk through a little bit in a moment. Then the people side of things, and Baroness Blackwood also alluded to this, the importance of actually having the health data scientists who can do the work, who can use the data and turn it into the discoveries and valuable insights that we need. And then finally, the infrastructure, and this is the Digital Innovation Hubs programme. So I'll talk about how this actually, the plumbing of how you actually get access to the data and how it makes it happen. And all of this needs to be underpinned by patient trust, public trust, and good governance to make that work. And that's been really stressed a lot in the previous conversation as well. Now, when we talk about data, what do we actually mean by it? So this chart just shows kind of the 3 dimensions of data that at Health Data Research we're thinking about. So you've got, if you look on the vertical axis, you've got the kind of the population, so all 66 million of us, and actually all of our data. You've then got the axis in terms of over time, so how our health and how we are over time evolving. And then the depth and detail of the data, so the different types, the multimodal data that we have in there. So, for example, our genetic information, our routine data, when we our last trip to the GP, that side of things. So there's a lot of different information out there. The big challenge is actually how it's connected and how it's linked so you actually can use it, how you overcome the silos to actually make this useful for research and for innovation. Now, I mentioned our science side of things. So we've got 6 priorities that we're working on at Health Data Research UK across the different universities on the science side. And they are around the human phenome, how that's been mapped, so similar concept to the human genome, but going into the phenotype. Applied analytics, so how AI, so we have a joint appointment with the Alan Turing Institute, thinking about actually how do we actually apply the AI tools and techniques into health. Thirdly, understanding the causes of disease, so really understanding the underpinning causes from that and using large-scale data to really help us understand better different types of diseases and how they manifest themselves. Then getting into clinical trials, so that was touched on in the previous conversation as well, around how you can actually use large-scale data to make trials faster, quicker, get to better, more accurate outcomes. How large-scale data is used in public health, so how we're thinking about informing public health decisions so we all make better decisions around our own care. And then finally, the last aspect is digital health insights, which is around how those benefits are then turned back into better interventions and interactions with the NHS. Now, I talked about people briefly. So what we're looking to do is to create 10,000 health data scientists across the UK. So this is a huge area, really big opportunity, and I think anyone who's thinking about this field, it's incredibly exciting, and please encourage your friends, your colleagues, or kids who are thinking about this as a new career, a new opportunity that brings together really interesting aspects. So I come as an engineer into this field, others coming as clinicians into this field, others coming in as statisticians or computer scientists. So it brings together all these different skill sets that we need to be able to actually transform how health data is being used. I'll get into the Digital Innovation Hubs programs. This is the infrastructure component. Let's think about it as the plumbing of how things work. So what we're doing is, and Geraint, as Geraint mentioned, is creating a world. What we want is the UK to be the leading place for health data research. And what we're doing is putting in place the leading infrastructure to allow that to happen. So we have the fantastic data, we have the fantastic researchers, we have the great life sciences industry, strong kind of support from government, but it's actually how do we make the actual data work from that point of view. And what we're doing is actually focusing particularly initially on curating data sets, clinical trials, and real-world evidence. And I'll talk a little bit about those in a moment. Over the last 6 months, what we've done is work with over 2,700 people. So we've engaged with people from NHS, from academia, from industry, and with patients and the public, with charities, to really understand about what people are wanting, what their concerns are, what obstacles there are to actually doing health data research at the moment, and innovation, and really then what pieces we need to put in place. We've also looked at other sectors to see actually how things work in the banking sector, how things work in communications, in telecommunications sectors, to see actually who solved these sorts of problems previously and how did they do it. And the key messages that came out from the conversations are it's really about people love the fact there's all this great data, but the difficulties in accessing it, how long it takes to access it, and then once they've accessed it, the quality of the data they have. So it's sitting in all sorts of shapes and forms. So once you've actually got it, how you actually get it to a form that actually can be used is very important to people. We also heard the clear message from the public that actually people like the idea of data being used, provided they understand it's transparent what it's being used for, and they can see the benefits feeding back into the UK, into the NHS, and for the wider population. So the design that emerged from this dialogue and conversations is this, which has 3 parts to it. So the first is the Alliance, and this brings together all of those organisations that hold data assets, and many of you in the audience may be organisations that are data custodians. And what we've done is bring together the kind of first of these. So we've got 9 organisations that come together from across the NHS, from other organisations, including Genomics England, CPRD, and bringing together and working on the points that Geraint was mentioning over actually how you get consistent standards in place, that everyone's lined up and thinking about how we're making the kind of shared vision around how we're making the data accessible and what things we're putting in place around access arrangements, around how we're thinking about IP, how we're thinking about information governance. So that's what the Alliance is for. That then works in partnership with the Digital Innovation Hubs. These were a competition that's been launched for the first of these at the beginning of May. And this is bringing together providing value-added services to the data. So we've got the data in the Alliance. It's then actually how you improve the quality of that data. So providing curated data sets in disease areas, so cancer, cardiovascular, those sorts of areas. And then thinking about actually how we provide the value-added services around clinical trials, so how you can use that data to actually make clinical trials faster, more effective, and then about real-world evidence, so how the data can be actually used once drugs or treatments are in the community, how we're using the real-world evidence to tell us, is it working, is it doing what we expected? And then the final part then is the gateway. So this is a common access point for health data, so that if you're an innovator or you're a researcher from an SME or from industry or from the NHS, you've got a common route to actually find the data, to know what exists, first of all, to discover it, to get an access route through it, and then starting to think about then how we make linkages between that, how we make that possible, and how we have aspects such as phenotype library baked into that, so that you're having a common same way of accessing the data. So those three parts work together. So the alliance, the hubs, and the gateway together is our proposed approach to actually making a trustworthy approach to using data, and also to enabling the feedback loop to the patients and the NHS. So I'll just kind of touch on each one of them, just giving you a broad sense of where we are with each of them. So the Alliance was started earlier this year, and we've had the first board meeting of the Alliance. So you've got organisations such as NHS Digital, NHS England in there. We've got, as I mentioned, the other ones across there. And what we're doing is working through a programme of work of actually putting in place the agreements and the standards so that things can be more accessible. Next part then, the hubs is the other part we have to this, which is drawing on expert international advice around ethics, so that we're actually considering data protection, getting the best advice on how to think through on that. Then into the hubs themselves. So we're looking initially, first 5 of these being available through the funding we're doing initially, but then looking to add on in the future would be fantastic that other organisations are bringing things through on that. So this is up and running from the competition closes on the 2nd of July, and then we're looking to announce those in autumn time, with the idea that they're up and running later this year. And then the gateway. So this is in design at the moment, and we're looking for getting that out later over the summer, so that we can actually start building the minimum viable product of that and having that running through the year, so that by the end of the year, the 3 parts are coming together: the data sets from the Alliance, the improved curation services starting to come in play from the hubs, and then actually having the gateway providing an access route to it. So there's a lot to do, and it's incredibly exciting to bring all the pieces together and relying on working so closely with all the different partners, as you can imagine, all the different organisations involved in all of this. But it should hopefully put the UK in a very unique and world-leading position. One of the other things you may have heard about is to inform the work we were doing, we initiated a set of sprint exemplars. So these were 10 different kind of initiatives that we funded at the start of this year for 10 months to actually learn and form the design of the Digital Innovation Hubs programme. So these are existing across the UK, so up in Manchester doing some fascinating work on heart failure, and actually how working with patients in terms of informing decision-making on that. Linking work going up in Scotland, up at Edinburgh, and then work over in Cambridge, also on bringing together the rare diseases side on that. So there's some really interesting pieces that what we want to do is to learn by doing, to actually start making things happen, to seed and catalyse. And what we're doing is bringing together regularly those groups to really see what they're learning as they bring together their partnerships across academia, the NHS and industry, and with patients, to see actually what's happening. Is what you're expecting to happen, what's new? What's it going to take to really seed this at scale across the country? And so just going back to my first slide, which is actually why we're doing this. So we're doing all of this so we actually do bring together the UK's data so we can make discoveries that improve patients' lives. And that's people across the country. That's you, that's me, that's all of us thinking about actually how is our data being used? How can we, and how do we build that public trust in a way that we actually are sure and confident this is working the way we want it to be, but also how do we start demanding that our data should be being used so that we do get these better results and better outcomes on that, and thinking through that. So I think thinking very clearly about what our role in all of this as well. So that's exciting place to be on this, and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you. If I could invite Jess and Matt to come up and join us on this stage, please. So Jess is one of NHSX's AI leads, working alongside Indra. She's also a researcher at the Oxford Internet Institute's Data Ethics Lab and is the co-lead of the One Health Tech Oxford Hub. Jess is primarily interested in ensuring that the NHS is able to capitalise on what's called the dual advantage of the ethical use of health data. That's to say, where it's aware of the risks and is able to mitigate them appropriately in order to capitalise on the opportunities. Also delighted to welcome to the stage Matt Whitty. Matt is the Deputy Director of Innovation at NHS England. His main areas of responsibility are being the programme lead for the Academic Health Sciences Networks and the testbed programmes, and he's also the Policy Development Lead for medtech funding mandate, testing infrastructure and the adoption and spread of innovation. So I think, Zara, am I right, we've got mics to go around in the audience if people want to ask questions. Is that the plan? Yep. But let me kick things off. Matt, actually, why don't I start with Jess? Jess, there's a lot of talk, and has been for quite a while, about the potential uses for machine learning in healthcare. How do we move from sort of hypothesising and pontificating about it to actually doing something in practice on the front line?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. I think we have to start moving from the what to the how. So we've spoken a lot about what is possible, how do you... Am I not loud enough? Sorry. Apparently, despite the fact that we are the health stage, every single person who's speaking today has lost their voice. So sorry for that. Yes, we have to move from the what to the how. We've spoken a lot about what is possible and also what should be the rules of sort of ethical AI. And now what we are doing is running a program of deep dive case studies into what is actually possible and how you go about implementing that on the front line, so that by the end of the summer we will hopefully have a list of what is best practice, so that we are able to assess against that. And I hope people will stay for the next session when you'll actually hear some of those case studies in more detail.
Great, thank you. Matt, how do you see the environment changing over the next few years to sort of promote the use of AI within the health sector?
Well, in a nutshell, I'd hope that it's going to be a lot more joined up, and things that we're doing at NHS England to support that. So the team that I work with within NHS England is the Innovation, Research and Life Sciences Group. And we're shortly going to be moving over to what's called the Boosted Accelerated Access Collaborative, which has got two aims, really. The first aim is to improve the pipeline for innovation, and then the second aim is to actually improve the uptake of those innovations. So two of the areas that I'm working on are improving the testing infrastructure. So we've currently got a testbed program that we're working on. So this is where we can bring together digital products and actually test them, firstly to test whether the technology works in the NHS setting, and secondly to test whether in that setting it can make the sort of the claims that are usually accompanying the business case, be that productivity savings or other types of savings as well. So the testbed program will sort of help with that. So secondly, we're also developing the medtech funding mandate. So from April next year, products that have been through NICE and have positive NICE guidance through a medical technologies guidance or a diagnostics assessment program and deliver cost savings, they will be mandatory for providers and commissioners to make available to patients. So this will be quite a big change in practice, because we're aware that some things do go through NICE, they don't quite get the traction when we actually look through the data for what the uptake is like. So by mandating that, we're hoping that will provide a stronger incentive for those things. So that's part of the work that I'm working on, and overall with the AAC, hopefully that will be a lot more joined up.
Great. And Caroline, what do you see as the kind of ultimate prize for the NHS, and more importantly for patients and the UK population as a whole?
So I think the prize is very big. It's incredibly exciting. So earlier diagnosis of disease. So you can see things already going on. I don't know if anyone saw the things on in Addenbrooke's in terms of the work they're doing with rare diseases for kids and finding out actually what's going on earlier. There's interesting things going on Alzheimer's Research UK on looking at basic things in terms of actually how your phone, in terms of your gait and your tapping on the phone and things, can you actually start spotting Alzheimer's starting to happen? So there's all sorts of absolutely fascinating things on early diagnosis that are potentially very interesting. There are then kind of aspects in terms of really understanding diseases better, the underpinning structures of diseases, so we actually really understand actually something that might be manifesting itself in one way in one person and differently in another potentially is the same disease, and actually starting then you can understand how to treat them better, then getting to better treatments. So if we've got the clinical trials on much larger populations and actually using them to actually find the patients who are most appropriate for those trials so we get better outcomes from that. So there's great work that Oxford and NHS Digital are doing on that at the moment. And then things like actually providing better care, so the work I mentioned that was going up in Manchester on heart failure monitoring, so they can actually get earlier interventions on people before they actually get to a kind of acute stage, emergency stage of needing to go into hospital. You can actually intervene at an earlier point. So the benefits from this are really, I mean, extraordinary and transformational for all of us. It will help the NHS, it will help each of us as individuals. So I think, yeah, very exciting.
Brilliant, thank you. Who'd like to kick us off with a question from the audience? Don't be shy. Gentleman over there.
Is that working? Across the UK, there are obviously areas of different degrees of digital maturity, and the HDR are obviously very interested in real-world data. What's the strategy to ensure that we don't have particular areas, geographic areas in the country left behind by avoiding funding areas that are slightly further ahead?
Great question. There's a next question down there, Zara, when you're ready. Yeah. Who'd like to pick that? Do you want to kick us off on that?
Shall I start from an HDR UK perspective? I think there's obviously going to be an NHS perspective and things on there as well on that. So from our point of view, we are looking at national coverage. So we have sites geographically located across all 4 nations, and from that perspective, so wanting the science to go on at nationally, that's obviously different to then where the data is available and the digital maturity on that. So obviously we're at stages of different hospitals with their EPR systems and the levels of development on that then does put insights in different places. But we think that by providing the national scientific aspect on that and the people area, we can then and what we're doing is moving to national priorities rather than geographically located. The insights coming out of the work will then benefit and feed back into people no matter what part of the country they're in on that. So as much, and I think the key thing on that is perhaps also ensuring you've got the diversity of data coming through. So that's not always correlated with the kind of where the maturity and things are on that. But ensuring we've got a good mix of people. So you'll find some populations are very good at providing lots of data, and others are less enthused by it. So you end up with a different profile of data coming through on that. So pushing that aspect is also important from our point of view.
Thank you.
Well, one of the other routes that we use to spread innovation is the Academic Health Science Network. So we do have national coverage through the AHSN network and through a commission that they have from the Office for Life Sciences, which is part of part of BAYS in government. They are working on developing real-world evidence and real-world testing across the country as well. So we have got that national spread as well. Additionally, as part of the Accelerated Access Collaboratives remit, we're looking to have sort of more joined up horizon scanning. So as part of that, we're looking across all of the different horizon scanning activities that are going on. We're looking to develop what are the research and innovation needs that are coming out of that. And again, we're working with the Academic Health Science Networks on that as well to help get that picture, which will feed into our plans for developing the testing infrastructure as well.
Thank you. The question down here at the front.
Yep. So my question was around the digital innovation hubs, where you mentioned that they would be focused on specific diseases. So I wondered whether there was specific diseases you had in mind. Is this about cancer or diabetes, mental health? Like which ones?
Yeah.
Are you looking at?
So this came from the industry and kind of innovation user perspective. They particularly highlighted diseases that they would find valuable and useful. And cancer, cardiovascular, all the ones you listed there were mentioned on that. But what we're asking each of the hubs to do is to think about actually their own sustainable model. So if they can demonstrate that they will be, actually there is a real user need for what they're doing, and that's what we'll be looking for through the process on that. So that will also help. So if people come in and say, actually, there's this one you didn't mention, but actually, look, there's this huge need for it, and then that will come through on that.
Thank you. Next question.
I'm an entrepreneur in this space, so I'm trying to make money. I'm being bold, that's true. And we've been looking at working with about 7 or 8 NHS hospitals about taking data from them to process it and do some deep tech, to do some interesting image work on cancer MRI. What is the view of the panel about the obligation between the NHS and an individual company in terms of equity shares, royalties, or just use of technology?
Thank you. And there was a question with the chap with the grey T-shirt next, and then I'll come back to you. Who wants to kick us off on that?
Two parts. So I think one, this has been one of the areas where it has been disjointed, and it's just sort of been left to the market. So there's a couple of pieces of work going on around sort of the value of, particularly around the value of NHS data. So that's looking at what is the consistent way to do that. Firstly, so that the NHS gets the benefit if something suddenly takes off and potentially becomes a royalty stream further down the line. But in the short term, actually, the focus has been around ensuring that NHS organisations do not sign up to data arrangements which are too restrictive or will prevent sort of greater, the broader benefits. So I guess sort of the short-term focus is on not signing up to very restrictive data agreements. In the long term, there are a number of pieces of work looking at sort of the value of data and how we best do that. There's obviously issues around sort of state aid if it comes to taking an equity share that we need to be considerate of. So it might be royalty streams as well, but we're at an earlier stage for understanding the legal implications of that.
Thank you. We had a question in the middle there.
So I had a question that, like NHSX and everyone, amazing technology is being developed around the world, but one of the most common problems everyone is facing is adoption of the technology by existing healthcare workers, doctors, nurses, and everyone in the system. So my question is, what would you say is the primary reason behind this? And how do you think you will address this in a way that we can get these technologies faster to the patients?
Thank you. Great question. Jess, do you want to have a go at tackling that one? Thanks.
Thanks. I very much doubt there's one particular reason. There will be multitudes of different reasons depending on the specific context, but I do think one thing that we have done really badly in the past is try and tell clinicians what technology we think they should be using, and also to say technology innovation for the sake of technological innovation, and events like this sometimes don't help with that because they try and amp up the hype. So one of the things that we are actively trying to do is kind of cut through the hype so that we're actually taking an evidence-based approach. So a few things that we're doing as a part of that. One, we're actually doing an active piece of research where we are doing some qualitative interviewing of frontline staff. And similarly, we're doing the same piece with patients to understand what it is, where are the pain points in either providing care or delivering care. So just take the technology out of the question. What is the worst parts of either delivering care or experiencing care that we then believe through the survey mapping exercise that we have been doing and the horizon scanning exercise that Matt mentioned, we know is available. So we can try and create the pathway to bring together that sort of supply and demand, regardless of what that technology actually is, instead of saying, hey, here's a neural network that does this, everybody use it please. Just be a little bit more strategic about that, and then hopefully if we have the evidence and the need base, the sort of reason why you would adopt is a bit clearer.
You've got a thumbs up there from the train driver, I think. Yeah. Matt, did you want to add anything to that?
So I completely agree with Jess. Evidence is one of the main things that we hear in terms of that, and then things that we've done to address that. So we're moving away from sort of an NHS England view of we think this is the right thing to do because we've heard it from this clinician or this group of clinicians, and much more moving towards using models where we use NICE to make that, because it's the best place to have those discussions, to gain that consensus, to test the assumptions in it. So using NICE more is one of those ways, and we're looking to put more digital products through NICE as well by expanding NICE's capacity for doing that. One of the other things that we do here with adoption spread is sort of the not made here problem. So it's it's a southwest thing, and we're never going to use it in the southeast, or it's one particular area. So that's another thing. So part of the testbed program, for example, that's why we're really looking to see, can it actually deliver the business case assumptions in there as well as does the tech work. And one of the ultimate measures of success for that program will be, following the completion of that, how many other sites choose to adopt that technology based on what they've seen from the test beds as well.
Great. Did you want to add anything, Caroline? Or?
Yes. I think also just thinking about, actually, I mean, clinicians are incredibly busy people, so I think any of us who've spent time with on a ward or in different areas, they don't have a lot of time to be spending, thinking about attending conferences, doing etc. On that. So it's actually building it into their place of work and actually building and designing it into the tools that they use, so that it's easy for them, rather than actually making it hard work for people to find out what's going on and adopting and things on that. So I think thinking about how you design it in.
Great, thank you. So we've got a question down here, and then one in the middle, and then I'll come to you. Thanks.
Thank you. This is a challenging question, I hope, but one of the things that becomes self-evident to anyone trying to deal with the NHS is that there isn't an NHS. There's a sort of conflagration of different NHS things, each of them acting to sort of individually, such that fostering agility in the NHS is one challenge, but fostering agility of the NHS is another. For example, I tried to determine who owns a dead patient's health records. And EMIS believe they may own them. The NHS believe they may own them, and equally the family of the deceased may have some say in them as well. Could you tell me, for example, who would be able to determine who owns a dead patient's records inside the NHS?
Shall I have a go at answering that one? So I think probably the problem is that the premise of your question. So I own this pen. I bought it off Amazon. It's my pen. If I choose to give it to Indra, it will become Indra's pen. Compare that with an email. So if I send an email to Indra, who owns the email? Do I own it? Does Indra own it? Does my employer own it? If I forward it to 15 people, who owns it? So ownership and data, the concept just doesn't work. And so in this country, we tend to think of it instead in three separate categories. So there's what's called the data controller, who has the say over how those data are used. There's the data processor, who actually does the doing. And finally, there's the data subject, who's the individual person. If you want to have a chat about deceased records, come and grab me afterwards and I can put you in touch with our information governance team. But I think that's probably the problem, is that ownership is just too simplistic a concept when it comes to data. Does anyone on the panel want to add anything to that? No? So the question just behind there. Thank you.
Hello. Question to Matt, mainly. So I'm an interesting case when we talk about test beds, in that I was working for a big industry player and one of the Wave 1 test beds, and big hopes for that combinatorial innovation and how we're going to roll it out. I'm now director in the HSNs, by the way, so I flipped to the other side. But we still have a challenge, and I was struck by the gentleman at the front talking about industry, which is when we've evidenced something in the test beds, how, beyond simply saying it works, how can we get beyond some of the procurement barriers that say this is a combination of both the NHS in terms of its processes and people, and a combination of technology which has been evidenced as working? How can we put a sort of stamp on that allows CCGs to be confident in making decisions to actually spread it? Because there is a spread opportunity locally, but we're all aware there's a spread opportunity nationally for some of these bigger innovations. Thank you, Matt.
So there's three parts to my answer on that, really. So firstly, we also see the same procurement challenges that you're alluding to around some of these products. So we've got our innovation and technology tariff and innovation and technology payment products, some of which have very similar procurement challenges. So again, we're sort of working through in the short term for those specific products. From that, we're also, with my medtech funding mandate hat on again, we've got to think about the procurement routes for that. So we're talking to SCCL, we're talking to the people in procurement, we're talking to the ABHI to sort of understand what those procurement barriers are, we're talking to the category towers, we're talking to Health Tech Connect to sort of see how we can actually piggyback on some of their processes for getting these things listed in the appropriate way. So I think those would be those would be sort of some of the main ways we're looking at it. It is a challenge, and part of the issue is that we're running to, so just for people who are maybe less aware of the issue, is that what we don't want with the funding mandate is to have the funding mandate in place and say, great, these are the things that we want adopted and spread, and then run into a procurement barrier that takes a year to work through as well. So we are completely working on that, but we certainly don't have all of the answers for that at the moment.
Right. Anyone to add? No. Next question. Thank you.
Hi. Before it was mentioned that the average uptake for innovation is 17 years. I got two questions interlinked. What is your forecast with the new organization? I work in the business side, sorry, so I have to ask this. And will there be a maximum amount of time for the test beds to reach completion? Are we looking at months, years, decades? Thank you.
So who wants to make a prediction, bearing in mind that this is being recorded so we can go back and test your accuracy in a few years' time? Yeah.
I'm not going to predict it. I mean, that's mine. I put that in Nicola's speech. But so I think that actually comes from the fact that typically it comes back to the question that we had before. Some of that is related to technologies that also require training, and that therefore slows things down. I think we also have to come back to the point around the fact that if there is a clear identifiable need that's not related to the technology, it will be easier to uptake it. Like if we go back to 2007 or even 2006, I don't think anyone woke up one morning and thought, you know what I really need is an iPhone. But we didn't have great mobile web, and so therefore there was a need for an app, and then the iPhone came in and it filled that very specific need. In terms of how long do we go from testing through to implementation, that is a question that's a little bit how long is a piece of string. I don't know if you have seen the NICE evidence framework for effectiveness, but it's based proportionally on risk. So if there is something that requires only a small amount of evidence, because we know that it's going to be clinically effective, or even if it isn't clinically effective for everyone, the amount it presents of a risk is proportionally small, then we wouldn't need to test it for as long. But if we are talking about something that actually we need to identify whether there's biases in the data sets, and we need to make sure it works in this particular instance and that particular instance, then I'm not going to put a cap just for the sake of getting it into the NHS at scale fast. So it's got to be context specific.
Thank you. Either of you foolhardy enough to make a prediction for us? Caroline, Matt? Yeah.
No.
But yeah. Thank you. So next question there in the middle, please, Zara. Lady here. Thanks.
Thanks for a really good session. So as a doctor, when I go into the bowels of the NHS data units on the ground, what I see is very different. So it's, the glitzy stuff's often at the surface or at the national level or in government bodies or in special projects. But the reality of day-to-day life involves still many Excel spreadsheets, proprietary visualization tools, not good support for coders who perform the basis of all our performance data. Caveat, I have a company as well that is doing well in that space, but not in the UK. We're making nice amounts of money in other countries, but not in the UK, because some of these things are kind of missing on the awareness screen. So my question is, when I talk to these people, back to the people on the ground, the data analysts, the tech people and the coders in NHS hospitals are often have rudimentary skills, are not given training or updating, and they're rather terrified with this juggernaut coming round of change. They're wondering basic things, will their jobs be taken over by machine learning, which frankly they should be, and they will, because some things machines do better. They're wondering, can they upskill? They're wondering what kind of skills they'll need to get next. Is there a roadmap for anything about transforming the NHS workshop that are not clinicians?
Thank you. Great question. So delving into the bowels of NHS data, as you put it, and what we're going to do to improve bowel health.
So I'd like to think of it perhaps not as a vowels, but these group of people are incredibly important to, and this is one of these why we've got it as one of our top 3 things of actually that group of people, and thinking of them as health data scientists and helping them build a career and being recognised as not admin and clerical at the bottom of the pile type of thing in terms of, but actually you are a profession of which you then need to be thinking through the skills, the journey, things on that. So we're putting in place parts and also working with Health Education England in terms of thinking through actually what is the route for individuals and what's the career path, how do you think about the links across NHS, academia and industry, because these individuals can move into those different places. So it's a hugely exciting future career for people in that space. And yes, some aspects will be replaced by technology, but actually drawing the insights and the value out of it, there's this huge area of opportunity for people to get into. So I'd hope that if we can tell the story, that actually there's a big opportunity from there, because we need more people in that space rather than fewer on that.
Great. We're running out of time, so we're going to step it up a notch into kind of quick-fire questions, if that's all right. One at the back here, and then there's one more over there. If anyone else has got a burning question, pop your hand up and I'll try and come to you.
Hi, yes. I was wondering if NHSX does many projects around operational optimization, so logistics and supply chain optimization for cost savings.
Do you want to have a go at that one, Jeff?
I think that depends a little bit on what you mean by does NHSX run any projects like that. We do in terms of, yes, we are looking at those types of test cases. So actually you'll hear one, if you stay, around operational efficiency from NHS Blood and Transplant, who's doing some really great stuff. So is NHS BSA, which is the Business Services Authority. So we are collectively, like from a horizon scanning perspective, aware that actually that's probably where we're going to release a hell of a lot of the value, is from that type of back-end stuff, the non-sexy stuff. But does NHSX run the project ourselves? That's not our role.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, thanks very much. As an NHS clinician, one often sees that IT infrastructure within the NHS is already unable to cope with day-to-day basic function. How does one envisage that not being a problem as we seek to implement new technologies?
Did you catch that? Do you mind just repeating the nub of your question one more time for us?
So I'm a clinician, and at the moment, basic IT infrastructure within the NHS is unable to cope with basic function. How does one envisage that not being problematic as we seek to implement new technology in the future?
Good question. What are we going to do about the sort of bread and butter technology that staff are using on the ground? I think it's your question, isn't it? Yeah.
I mean, there's a few things that we can do. One, we have to sort of move towards a model that we are actually thinking about full stack development. So quite often we have gone in and said, right, let's put the shiny thing at the end, let's put the cherry on the cake without understanding all the ingredients that are in the cake. We are now moving away from that model where we are actually trying to see, like, if we were going to implement a clinical decision support software in a hospital, what are all the layers that sit underneath it? The second thing is NHSX's real move towards standardization and open standards as opposed to the actual infrastructure. So we've kind of had this weird history where we either did the national program for IT, or then everyone went, whoa, that was bad, so let's try and let everyone else kind of do their own thing. But instead what we're trying to do now is create the environment and say, as long as you're operating within these frameworks, then you'll go ahead and choose. But that then does also mean that we are simultaneously giving choice to the people who are putting that stuff in a hospital on the ground, but we're also making it very, very clear to providers of those types of technologies that if you are not abiding by these standards with regards to interoperability, usability, user experience, that's what we're all about, then you're not going to play in our playing field.
I think Caroline wanted to come in.
But I think you're right as well in terms of the unless if you're a clinician who can't get access to a computer on wheels or whatever, and you're sitting queuing up and having to wait till 8 o'clock in the evening before you get to enter your data. I mean, it's just crazy. So we have to make ways of making it just easier to enter in things, get the data in right first, rather than having to spend lots of money on curating data after the event because it didn't get entered in at the right time or right way initially. So there's lots by actually getting it baked in and solved at the front line will make the data a lot better. So I think it is a really important point.
Thank you. On that positive note, can I thank you, the audience, for some fantastic questions, and to our panel for their very thoughtful answers. Thank you.
And thank you to Geraint as well for wonderful chairing. So, everyone, we're going to have a really short break for about 20-30 minutes, and loads of you have come up and asked me about how do we actually work with the NHS. So, what I would do is encourage you to stay, because we've got 4 fantastic companies who have partnered with the NHS. So it's a chance to actually ask them, actually, how did you do it? Because we do sit in the centre, so we have a slightly odd view of how you can partner with us. And I look around and I can see some fantastic people, say hello, at the back, who have already done it as well. So do hang around, 12:30, we're rejoining, and hope to see all of you then. Thank you. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the NHSX stage on the health stage at CogX. That's quite a big mouthful. But thank you, everyone, for hanging around. And we've managed to almost pass the rain, haven't we? It's like a little pitter-patter today. So this is the last session, so please stay awake, get your questions ready. And this is going to be the best session that you've attended all day. So you heard something from policy people. Now you're actually going to hear from the people who are doing it. And as an A&E doctor, I love people who actually get shit done. And these guys have got a lot of shit done. So it takes great pleasure for me to announce one of our deputy directors, Ian O'Neill, at the new NHSX, to hand over onto this session. Ian, thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Indra, for setting a very low bar of staying awake. So I hope we can meet that. Look, thanks for giving me the chance to speak here and to do what I think is probably the most interesting part, like Indra, which is to introduce some people who are actually out there doing the real thing. As Indra said, I used to be, or still am, a civil servant in the Department of Health and Social Care. I'm now a civil servant in NHSX, and we're trying to work out what that means for us all. But at the core of it, and the thing that we've been working on probably for the last year or so, is to try and create a health and care system that helps innovators like the four that you're about to see to support us to meet the needs and use the most innovative tech in order to do that. So, as a system, we're looking at how we can make it easier for people who've proven that they're meeting a need, that they're doing something that helps us as the system, as patients, as users, as clinicians, and take it and roll it out. It shouldn't be like the old travelling salesman with your thing in a briefcase, rocking up at all of the trusts and trying to flog your thing over and over again. The system should be ready to promulgate good innovation. So some of the things we're trying to do at NHSX to support that are, be hard on standards, try and shift the system to a kind of standardized mode so that if something works somewhere, the kind of technicalities of rolling it out become much easier. And we're looking at, hard levers that we have in that space around spend controls. Can we get in and see what people are buying and make sure that it meets our standards and that it makes the kind of rolling out of innovation easier. Now, we're also looking at softer measures, like how can we support the people in the regions to understand what it is that they need and what it is that they're buying. Can we put in place procurement frameworks? Can we, train people up? So we're coming at it from a two-pronged attack, which is that we're no longer going to stand by while you buy things that make it difficult for us to innovate or accept innovation into the system. But we're also going to hopefully put in place some support so that we're not just beating people with a stick. As I say, very happy to be here and to introduce the four teams that you're going to see now, because this is kind of what it's all about. It's about using the latest technology to transform health and care, and our job in the centre is to make it easier for the really smart people like yourselves and like these four to come and do that for us. And I'm always in awe when I meet people like these, because I wish I had the balls to kind of do something like that myself, but I don't. I'll sit in the centre and shuffle paper and do policy, and hopefully something will happen. So we have four innovators that you're going to hear from. They're each going to speak about their thing for about 10 minutes, and then at the end of it, hopefully we'll have some Q&A. Hopefully some of you might have some questions. We don't have microphones, so you'll just have to stand up and shout, and then I'll repeat it if people can't hear. So we have Nick Watkins and Andy Gray from Cortical. Here they are. They're going to show us an application of AI in blood supply and demand planning. Sorry, Nick is actually from NHS Blood and Transplant. We will then have Emma Hughes from Alderhay Children's Hospital, who's the head of innovation there, and is going to show us an AI virtual assistant. Piers Keane from Moorfield to show us AI in diagnostic eye disease. and Jacqueline Moxon from MRAD, AI in breast screening. But first up, as I've said, Nick and Andy. Thank you.
Thanks. So yes, you have a double act, so we're going to try and keep this to 10 minutes between us. What I've said to Andy is if I go over, he has to truncate his bit of the presentation. So I'm from NHS Blood and Transplant, Andy's from Cortical. I'm going to set out the problem that we have as an organisation, and Andy's going to talk a little bit about the solution that Cortical are working on. So NHS Blood and Transplant, our primary role around blood donation is to collect blood from blood donors, process that using standardised processes and distribute it to hospitals. We distribute blood to all hospitals within England. We collect about 1.5 million donations each year from about 1 million different donors. And we're looking at how we can use AI and advanced analytics in a number of areas as an organisation. So we're looking at it around, can we predict donor behaviour? Can we look at it around, can we understand the impact of donation on individual donors, on their health? And the area that we're going to talk about today is, can we look at intelligent process design in terms of making our organisation more efficient? So I'm going to focus specifically on platelets. So platelets, these are life-saving donations. They go to patients who have a very low platelet count. They may be having chemotherapy. They may have had traumatic injury. Essentially, this stops them bleeding out. We have two ways in which we collect platelets. One's called apheresis, one's called pooled. You don't really need to know about those. We hold roughly about a day of stock of platelets at any one time, and we take those donations and we process them into about 128 different types of product that hospitals in England can order. They have a 1-week shelf life, so they're high value, short shelf life products that we need to maximise the use of that donation to make sure that wastage in that system is as low as it can be. Average demand on a daily basis is about 695 units, and that goes to 248 hospitals in England. We used to distribute blood to North Wales, but the Welsh have taken that back. So there's a Welsh blood service, a Scottish blood service, we're the English blood service. And it's not working, that's because I'm not holding up. So the project that we're working on with Cortical, and this is a true collaboration. We started off with a number of pilot studies which showed that we could work with Andy and his team at Cortical. And then we applied to Innovate UK for funding for a project to essentially digital transformation project. So what the work that we're talking about is funded by Innovate UK. It's not funded by us as an organisation, but it's funded by the UK government through Innovate UK. And it's looking at whether we can improve the platelet supply chain. So the graph on the right, as you look at it, I'm not sure whether you can see it, but that shows the variation in platelet demand that there is within a particular hospital. So on one day they can be ordering 12 units of platelets, on another day they're ordering 70 units of platelets. So we're seeing quite a large fluctuation in use of platelets in hospitals. And at the moment we have no way of looking at data within hospitals. So we're not predicting our collections on the basis of anything that's happening within the hospital other than the orders that they're placing. So we're interested in terms of this project, whether we can better predict demand, whether we can integrate hospital data, and then whether we can better understand how we're currently operating. And Andy's team at Cortical, they have some skills and a skill set that we can't put towards this problem within NHSBT. It's hard for us to attract the type of expertise that a company like Cortical have. And so I'm going to hand over to Andy, and he's going to talk about this solution.
Thanks, Nick. All right, so So we're going to talk about using artificial intelligence and machine learning to actually improve the demand planning. And so the scope of this is trying to do it for the blood supply chain, as Nick talked about. And it's really going from donor. So, when people give blood at a donor center, you've got the platelets only survive for 7 days. So you've got to get that through all manufacturing, all of the testing, back out through the distribution, back out to the hospitals. So it's really sort of, 7 days is a very short time span to have all that happen, make sure that you've got all the blood products in all the right place. And so the focus is on platelets, especially because they are that sort of high value, short shelf life product. And so the scope is national as well. So it's across all the stockholding units, feeding into all the hospitals from all the donor centers. And then as part of the next phase, we're going to look at going into some of the hospitals and actually showing what the value increase we can expect if we can get that hospital data, improve the predictions, and then drive that through. So the targets for success are a 50% reduction in waste and a 50% reduction in the ad hoc transport costs, which we're going to touch on in a little bit. And this is quite an ambitious project because from when we receive data to actually going live in August, that's a 6-month window, and then we've also got we're going to go with the hospital data then in March following that. And so when we're looking at the problem here, you can see this is the donor center. So this is where all the different people who do the collections. Then it goes to these stock holding units, which are basically sort of where we collect all of that blood up, and then it goes into the different manufacturing sites, and then it goes back out to all of the different stock holding units. And obviously we've got to try to figure out, is it A negative, A positive, where all those blood's going to ride, is it CMV neg? So there's lots of different ways that you can have all of these products, and it's a case that we need all of that demand in the right place. But unfortunately, despite the fact that NHS already do quite sophisticated modeling, they're using linear regressions and all these sorts of things to try to get that demand predicted correctly, they end up having to shuffle around a lot of the supply that they already get to the stock holding units so that that it is where it needs to be. And obviously, these ad hoc movements, as they're called, they can be quite costly as well. So the two big things that you get is, obviously if it's in the wrong place, it doesn't get used, you've got those expiries, and then if you have to move it, then you've got the cost for the ad hoc movements. So we're missing some slides. Okay, so basically, like imagine my diagram. So basically, like what we've got is when you're trying to do the predictive modeling, so you need to basically be able to figure out like who's going to come in. What donors are likely to show up, what blood are you going to have to create the platelets from, and then you also then have to do the modeling around each of the hospitals, where that blood is going to go. Basically, then if you're looking at the patients, you need to predict what procedures are going to happen. So there's actually like a large amount of modeling that you need to do for this because it's quite a complex supply chain, and then you've got all the logistical movements that you need to model as well. So by using our technology, we're able to actually automate a lot of that sort of creation of the deep neural networks and the XGBoost and the other algorithms that you might have. And so we're able to build out models very, very quickly to solve a lot of these different problems. So thank you very much.
The presentation isn't supposed to end there. Andy's got two great slides where he's showing how his company are presenting the data back to us. So essentially at the moment, we operate on spreadsheets. We've got an SA99 process. It's very manual. And what the team at Cortical are building is something that's much more automated. And essentially it gives you the next best action as a result of it. So he's taking all of our data, integrating it in their automated system called the Core, building models on that. And currently, our initial estimates are, with the first cut of the model, there's between, well, it depends on the different type of platelet, but there's between sort of about 15.5% saving or average sort of improvement in their forecast compared to what we're currently doing. And we think that will get better as we start adding hospital data, because you can imagine if a surgeon orders a blood test and you get a low platelet count, there's a likelihood that that patient is going to go on to require a platelet transfusion. And we can't see any of that data yet, and that will be phase 2 of this work. So I have to apologise. There were a couple more slides in there.
No, we apologise to you. So sorry that your slides weren't there, but thank you. Thank you very much, both of you. Thank you. Great, okay, so as I said, we'll rattle through the presentations and then we'll come for questions at the end. So next up, Emma Hughes from Alder Hey Children's Hospital, Head of Innovation at Alder Hey Children's Hospital. Thank you, Emma.
Hi, good afternoon. As I said, I work in the innovation department at Alder Hey. We actually have a dedicated innovation hub where our vision and our mission is really to have impact with innovation. We heard some speakers earlier today around how do we actually take the technology that's being done, get this staff engagement and deploy it within a hospital setting. That's really our mission around we're working from the start in terms of what are the healthcare challenges, what are the needs of the staff and the patients, and obviously it's very patient-driven, but also to get some of innovation having impact, we really do need to engage the staff from the very beginning. And so our innovation department is working on a programme of identifying needs and challenges from within the hospital. Now, again. One of our first projects we started probably back in 2016 was the use of artificial intelligence for patient experience. We believe it's the first hospital setting use case of AI for patient experience. It's basically a virtual assistant, a conversation service, which was answering basic questions around the hospital for hospital visits, pre-op, post-op information. We started as a generic set of information, and we're also then developing into specific knowledge domains. So, for example, looking at muscular dystrophy or looking at head injury. So we've actually wanted to provide relevant information at the point of need for patients and their family, and that it's reliable information. So what we've actually done is we're creating its new data. So we've worked a lot, again, very much around, going back to kind of code of conduct, engaging the patients and the staff around what is the information that they both need. And they are based on questions that we've worked through with all of the different departments. And then we've answered those questions. They're clinically validated or operationally validated around the hospital. The other reason for working on this AI project wasn't just around can we deploy AI, it was also looking about building the knowledge and capabilities within Alder Hey itself. Again, looking at the future of innovation in healthcare, we recognise that we want to collaborate with external partners and companies, but we also need to build a capability internally and understand what we're going to require from resources to actually then deploy the solutions. So this project has been kind of multifaceted in terms of actually solving a problem around providing that information and the point of need to patients and families, but also about us understanding how do you actually go ahead and deploy this within a hospital setting. So our partners for this are the Science Technology Facilities Council Hartree lab in Dyersbury, and it's utilising IBM Watson. So we worked with them, as I said, going back in 2016. They were actually part of the understanding the needs from the staff and the patients. We looked at how does the technology actually match that challenge. So we looked at how we use the IBM Watson Conversation Service, what would need to be done to that. Again, this is a very collaborative approach. We engage in a collaboration agreement. We were both kind of putting skin in the game at this stage because, again, this Watson platform hadn't been used within a hospital setting or within a patient experience. So what we've learned from this is that it's not just about the technology. What Alder Hey brings to this is real clinical utility. How can it be properly deployed? How do the question gathering? How do we answer it in the appropriate ways? And how do we do all that within the structure and governance and regulations within a hospital? So they've been on a journey with us, and they've been bringing obviously a lot of the technical knowledge, and it's been a very iterative process. What we tried to do, though, is that we looked at, in addition to the technology, and again this was mentioned earlier today, it's really important we understand how this is actually valuable. So we took a number of kind of assumptions and objectives of the project that we needed to deliver on. Was, can we actually deliver this within a hospital context? And actually we've shown we can. We've got a minimal viable product. It's out there. It's available on our intranet. We're sending it. It's available through our patient engagement app, Alder Play. And it answers questions about, kind of pre-op or pre-assessment or general hospital information, anything from where's the parking to does a blood test hurt? So from an MVP, we've ticked that box. The other thing is, can it really support and enhance patient experience? So again, it's been a very iterative process around the technology, but we've also engaged on a regular basis with kind of user evaluations. And users, again, patients, staff, families, we have an internal guidance group. And we've also got additional evaluations going on in terms of, as we develop the technology, does it still work? How do we enhance it? And again, it's completely iterative and collaborative. The other thing that obviously is critical within this is are we making sure that we can deploy a virtual assistant within the governance and regulations standards. So Again, we've got a multidisciplinary project team. We've engaged, part of the team is a clinical data safety officer, who's one of our consultants. We work very closely with information governance. We completed a DPIA, and we are looking at the ongoing and emerging regulations, and we're working to that. One of the things with where we started with this is it's quite, we took the lower risk model in that this is not a diagnostic tool. This is about patient experience. But as I said, we're building a capability around and understanding how AI can be used within a hospital setting. So what we've been doing is working within the frameworks and the structure under the code of conduct that enables us, as we grow this virtual assistant, long term we'd like it to be more personalised. At the moment there's no personal data in there. We already have that framework agreed. We've got that data security, data infrastructure set up. In addition to that, we've also got to make sure that we are bringing tangible benefits to the hospital. So it's not just about the patients, but also how's this going to be sustainable? And generally that means there's got to be some resource or financial benefits. So we're working with procurement, and we're working with different departments, looking at how where there's actual value in this going forward. And I think the other thing that's really important as part of our project is we're actually looking about how do we make this a sustainable solution in terms of looking at ongoing resources, requirements for it actually to be deployed. And part of that exercise is we actually now have 3 other hospitals who've agreed to work with us to be early adopters. So again, it's going back to that, how do we actually embed new technology and innovation, how do we get it adopted and deployed? It's about really working very closely with the front line, with the clinicians, with the other trusts, with the other hospitals to build that confidence. And as you probably can hear, going through some of those project assumptions mixed into that were a lot of actually the kind of code of conduct, the principles from the code of conduct that's just been released. So I won't go through them all at the moment, but again, just touching on making sure that we are engaging staff and patients. We're looking at how the new data set is being created, understanding, the DPIA and IG compliances. We're making sure we're, thinking about onboarding and also working very closely in terms of different guidelines, the NICE guidelines. And I think also the other piece of it is we've got this team that also includes a commercial eye in terms of we have to be sustainable as the NHS. Innovation isn't going to run on its own. So again, it's looking at how do we deploy this, how do we become sustainable, and what are the interesting business models that we can create as part of this process. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma, and thank you for the nod to the code of conduct, which Indra, Jess and Tina were all instrumental in delivering. I'm going to assume that they didn't pay you to put a whole slide in there about it, but we can talk about it later. Okay, next up, Piers Keane to talk about AI in diagnostic eye disease at Moorfields. Thank you.
It's fantastic to be here. I'd like to thank Indra for inviting me to speak. And I have to say, Indra, that your motto of getting shit done is one that really resonates with me. So I hope that we can really develop the links with NHSX and really try and kind of transform the way we do things in healthcare. So I'm going to speak about the collaboration between Moorfields Eye Hospital, where I'm a consultant, and DeepMind. And the idea is to use AI to reinvent the eye examination. And this is just my financial disclosure just to start. I think the most important thing to say is that I am paid as a consultant by DeepMind. So although I sort of think that DeepMind are great, and I think the culture and the ethos of DeepMind is something that is very much in line with the values of Moorfields, I do have that financial bias. So I want to clear that. So this is a collaboration that I think, at least some of you will have heard about. It was a collaboration that we announced in sort of mid-2016. And I had actually contacted DeepMind, I think in about July 2015, and I'd contacted Mustafa Suleiman from DeepMind and basically sent him a message on LinkedIn and said, hi, I'm a consultant at Moorfields. We're doing X thousand retinal scans per day, per week at Moorfields. There are people who are losing sight irreversibly because they can't get seen and treated by an ophthalmologist quickly enough. We should work together to apply deep learning to triaging these OCT scans. And so that led to this announcement. And one of the things that I want to highlight to everybody here, which I think that even for the doctors here, or the non-ophthalmologists here, and maybe even for some ophthalmologists that you may not be aware of, is that ophthalmology is not a small specialty in the NHS, and not a small specialty around the world. In fact, in 2017, NHS Digital released statistics that ophthalmology overtook orthopedics as the #1 medical specialty across the NHS in terms of outpatient appointments. And so actually, nearly 10% of all NHS outpatient appointments are for eyes. And that number has been going up by a lot recently, and we are drowning in the number of referrals that we get. And that is getting worse and worse. So I say that because I just want to convey the imperative that we needed to do something, and we need to do something like this, whether it's with DeepMind or with others. I initiated that collaboration 2015, 2016, and then there followed a phase where I had a chance to sort of talk about the collaboration, and I found myself getting invited to events in the healthcare world and the tech world to talk about it. But what was slightly awkward was that we hadn't actually published any results. I couldn't talk about what we had achieved. And so it was finally, it was a great relief then in August and September of 2018 when we published the results, the first proof of concept results of the collaboration in the journal Nature Medicine. And so, Nature Medicine, as you'll be aware, is one of the world's leading journals. It's the #1 journal for translational medicine in the world. And what I want to highlight there is there's 34 different co-authors on this paper. And there's lots of consultants from Moorfields, senior scientists from UCL, and scientists from DeepMind. So this was really a really strong, meaningful research collaboration, and it was very much not the case of going, here's our data, come back to us when you've solved the problem. Now, it was also a great honor that it was featured in the cover of Nature Medicine. And of course, this being AI, you cannot escape the hype around it. And so you had things like this, cover of the Evening Standard, computer diagnosis could save the sight of millions. And you can imagine how exciting it was after all the hard work to see something like that. And you can imagine how much my mother was sharing this on Facebook and telling all the relatives how great her son was and all of those things, which was great, but also a little bit awkward, because let me tell you, just to be clear, we have not saved the sight of a single person yet. What we've done is done proof of concept results to show that this is, has great potential for the future. But actually, what I've come to learn is that the research paper is only kind of like one small step, and actually translating into clinical practice is a big journey ahead of us. And I'll tell you a little bit about that, and we can deal with it in the questions and answers also. But what did we do? Well, we created this novel kind of deep learning architecture that consisted of 2 neural networks. So what we start is, on the left, we feed in a raw OCT scan. So an OCT scan is optical coherence tomography. It's like ultrasound, but uses light instead of sound waves and gives us really high resolution images of the retina and of the eye, like order of magnitude higher than an MRI scanner or a CT scanner. So we feed in a raw OCT scan into 2 neural networks in series. The first neural network segments the images. So actually we've trained it to delineate all the disease features on the scans, and that then creates this kind of tissue representation of the pathology that's going on. And that's fed into a second neural network, which is a classification network, which we've trained with disease labels. So we say, this is age-related macular degeneration, this is a macular hole, this is diabetic eye disease. We train it with thousands of those labels. And then ultimately what it spits out is 2 things. It spits out a referral suggestion. So it will say urgent referral, semi-urgent referral, routine referral. and it will spit out it will diagnose what's on the scan. So it will look at 10 different features that we would expect a retina specialist or consultant ophthalmologist to say, this is present. Drusen, geographic atrophy, all these things that probably mean nothing to most people in the room, but are very exciting for someone like me. And we use three-dimensional UNet models for this. Now, as a byproduct of the way that we've set this up, the first neural network produces a ton of quantitative information. So it's not just that this can diagnose or triage what's going on, it can measure the amount of leakage of fluid into the eye, the bleeding, the scarring, and a lot of other information that is, let me tell you, not available at all to ophthalmologists currently. So we essentially look at the scan and go, better, worse kind of assessment, but we get much more numbers on that. The other thing to say is that we've trained it with more than 50 different retinal diseases. So we've trained it with everything that comes to Moorfields, except in the case of very rare diseases where, suppose you're the only person at Moorfields with disease X, then we wouldn't transfer that because we didn't want to, because we're dealing with anonymized data, and we want to avoid the risk of re-identification if you're the only person with a certain disease. Here's an example of the prototype viewer. This is a patient with diabetes, guy in his 40s, poorly controlled diabetes. And what you can see there is that it's segmenting, and it's a bit hard for me to talk you through it in this setting, but what it's doing is it's segmenting the edema of the retina, and then it's saying this is macular edema, and it's saying semi-urgent referral. Now, my last couple of slides now, before they drag me off, is to say, well, we've created this model and we wanted to evaluate its performance. So we got 1,000 new patients that presented to Moorfields that had an OCT scan done at first presentation that the algorithm had never been exposed to in the training, and we ran the algorithm on that independent test set, and we looked at its output on the referral suggestion. And so what it got was that, and lower is better here, it had a 5.5% error rate on the referral suggestion. We then got 8 human specialists. So we got experts 1 to 4 who are consultant ophthalmologists at Moorfields, who are retina specialists, who are world famous experts in diagnosing retinal disease, and experts 5 to 8 who are optometrists who work at Moorfields who have some experience in looking at these things. And how did it do against those experts? Well, it did very well. In fact, it did better than all 8 experts except for the top 2, which it did better than, but it wasn't statistically significantly different. Now, however, it's not fair to the retina specialists or to the humans, and I would urge you to be cautious whenever you hear the hype around superhuman performance with AI, because a lot of the time you find that the humans are doing something that they don't do in the daily life, or with one arm tied behind their back in the assessment. So actually the humans never look at the OCTs alone. They always have a retinal photograph, they have a visual acuity, they have some history. And so we repeated the exercise giving all of that information. And indeed that did improve the performance of the algorithm, of the humans, and the best human got down to the 5.5% error rate that the algorithm had using the OCT alone. And you may say, well, what did it get wrong? And the key thing that the BBC picked up on was AI did not miss a single urgent case. And in fact, the ones that it had the wrong decision, when we looked at the reference standards, they were often very ambiguous, challenging cases. And a lot of the time, with the benefit of hindsight, we felt actually our algorithm has got the right answer and our reference standard diagnosis was wrong, or at least questionable. So my last slide then, where are we going with this? What are the next steps? Well, look, I'm as excited as the next person, probably as any of you here, about the potential of AI in healthcare. But I think it's really important that we mix that enthusiasm with the kind of cautious optimism, a certain skepticism about these things. Because I think that there's great potential, but there's also lots of ways it might not work. So we have to have robust clinical validation before we let this technology loose in patients. We're also doing a lot of projects now related to AI-assisted science. In particular, we think we can predict the future onset of macular degeneration 6 months ahead of schedule. And we think that ophthalmology will be the first medical specialty to be fundamentally transformed by the application of artificial intelligence. Lastly, it's hard to read, that's my email address, that's my Twitter handle. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Piers. Thank you. Okay, finally, Jacqueline Moxon, who's going to talk about AI application in breast screening. Thank you.
Everyone see that? Everyone hear me? Good afternoon. Apparently the trains are going to be on time this afternoon, so we'll try and whiz through this so you can actually hear what I'm saying. I'll move closer over to here. Can you hear me now? Yeah. Okay, so slightly different slant. I work for MRAD, which is the East Midlands Radiology Consortium, and we are based in the Midlands, and we have 7 trusts along the bottom there that we are joined together. We are one of the test beds for this year, and we are working with 4 partners: Optimity as an evaluation partner, Chiron, faculty, and GE Healthcare, who are our contractor. We are looking at using AI for breast screening. So artificial intelligent breast screening, as we are learning to support. So we're trying to improve the capacity, improve patient care and the confidence. I think we've heard a lot today about patient and public confidence in AI. So what we're trying to do is more than just AI. On the right-hand side there is quite a powerful picture of Dr. Liz O'Riordan, who is actually one of our patient supporters. She's also a breast surgeon and has recurrent breast cancer. So we're looking at the engagement, the clinical feedback, the systems integration. So what we found to date, one of the problems is that we're working with legacy systems, trying to get the data out of the NHS, and then trying to provide that data to our partners that we're working with faculty and Chiron. So it's been quite problematic. We're halfway through. So this is the real world. How are we going to then expand it across the trust once we get to the end of the test bed? So we're at the stage at the moment we have just provided de-identified data to Chiron, who are using their MIA tool, there's the train, who are using their MIA tool to review that data and calibrate it. So it's going to be a couple of months before we get to the next stage, and that is retrospective data. So as we go forward, we'll do the next stage, and we will have to have a trial. So there's quite a lot of work, and I think sort of Pierce was saying there that we have to take it, sort of a pinch of salt really with all of the hype that's going on. It's going to take a while to actually get all this data out there and get the AI working. Okay, so one of the big things is around the IG. Now, I would say probably a year ago before we started this project, IG is always seen as a barrier. GDPR came on. It's we can't share our data. But in actual fact, you need to look at it from a different perspective. Why are we sharing the data? Are we sharing it appropriately? Are we following all the GDPR principles? And are we now following all the code of conduct that's coming in? So it's been problematic getting a head around what the suppliers actually wanted, what they were going to do with the data, who's got the intellectual properties of the algorithms to start with, and then afterwards, once we've actually done our testing, what are we going to do with the data again, who owns it? So we've done quite a lot of work on that, and we're happy to talk to anybody who wants to work through that IG minefield with us. So as we move forward now, it's about building clinical and patient support for this technology. With the other partner that we're working with, faculty, we're looking at the operational aspect. So again, trying to use that data, and that involves staff data as well. So have we got the right people in the right place? So if we're going to produce this imaging data, get the ladies through the process a lot quicker, have we got the staff in place? So breast screening, just so if you're not aware, we're understaffed within breast screening by 25%. Retirement, we've got a lot of vacancies. So it is a big issue, and I'm sure radiology isn't alone. All the other disciplines that we've talked about today over the course of the event. So, as I said, we've got a padlock there. We're on the threshold of providing data to the second AI company. I would expect that in 3 years' time, when I go for my next breast screening, being in that age group, that the second reader should be, and I hope it will be, AI. So we will still have the human element. I think everybody, that's what they're fearful of. Is there a human touch to all of this AI? So I think you need to expect that it's coming. If you're fearful of it, you need to get your head around it, because it's going to happen in our generation. But I say, as expected, that in 3 years' time, there will be a machine that will read one of my images, and we'll have a human reader next to it. And I would expect when I go back in 6 years, it will be, it's out there as a norm. So thank you very much. I think we're going to hand over now. We're going to have some general questions. Thank you.
Okay, so we don't have much time left. I am going to selfishly ask one question first, very, very quickly, and then we will get maybe one. Oh, we can get two from you guys, so have a think. My first question, very selfishly, while I'm here, is, as we are trying to support you, firstly, thank you for what you do. Brilliant to see everything that you've shown us today. Thank you, honestly, thank you, because it must be very, very difficult in the environment that exists at the moment to persist. So thank you for doing that. If there was one thing that we at the centre, NHSX, could do to kind of make your lives easier and make it easier for others like you, what would that be? You're going to need a microphone. Go ahead, Nick.
From my perspective, it's bringing together all of the different governance processes, regulations, codes of conduct is starting to do that, because we try to map out, if we start a data-driven innovation project, what are all of the different requirements of that, and what do we have to consider? And it's a big piece of work in terms of trying to look at an easy toolkit to say, right, as a startup company or even as a trust, what boxes do we need to tick and what we need to be considering at the beginning of a project?
Okay.
So I would add to that. I would totally agree with that. I would say clarity about what the rules are, and particular in relation to information governance. It's like you want to do the best possible job with regard to information governance. If you were reading an article about your research in a newspaper, you would want to feel confident that the people had done the right thing. And the reason why information governance is a challenge is not because people want to take shortcuts, it's because there's lack of clarity about what you can do. And oftentimes you encounter this thing where people just don't know, and they just go GDPR, GDPR, and then you go, well, why is that an issue? Can you just pin, what's the specific thing we have to deal with? And they just go, no, GDPR, and then you have to deal with that. And oftentimes you're in a cycle, and I'm sure you guys can relate to it, where you arrange a meeting and you have this meeting with someone, nothing happens, 2 months have passed, 6 months have passed, and at the end of 6 months or the end of a year or maybe never, you just realize actually it was something simple and we just wasted 6 months, and actually if someone who knew what they were talking about had told us the right thing at the start, no problems.
Brilliant. Thank you. Okay, do you want to say?
Yeah, sure. I think I'd like to. Yeah, so I think Nick can probably add to this, but with what we're doing, the initial stages, at the sort of stockholding unit level, so it's not really engaging with the hospitals, but in the second phase, as we're engaging with hospitals, I think we found some NHS trusts that are really excited to work with us, and that's really great. But I think doing the broader rollout is going to be a challenge, and if NHSX was able to assist with that, I think that'd be really great.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. Okay, so a couple of questions from the audience. Man at the back had his hand up very early. You might need to shout quite loud, if that's okay. I don't think we have a mic.
Hi, my name is Emilio Somniatis, I'm a child psychiatrist and digital innovation lead at Tabitha in Portland. So in a very similar position to Claire, absolutely agree about the tool concepts of work. What I'd like to ask is about your views on unlocking for innovators working in the NHS a share of IP or a profit share in developing these products, that a lot of your time has gone into developing stuff. How can we inspire people to have it run at the end, at the beginning, during, and at the end of the process? Okay, so what's the latest in NHSX?
Okay, well, NHSX thinks that's very interesting, but I suppose you're asking the panel, would it have helped, or do you need help if we were interested in those co-creation models or something?
Yeah, so I suppose from our point of view, we're in the fortunate position that because we're Innovate UK funded, we have to have a collaboration agreement between the different parties, which includes sort of, for want of a better word, kickback to NHSBT for our involvement in it. I think I'd put the question back to the companies that want to work with the NHS, and actually they need to be aware that it's not just about getting the data and providing a product. There has to be some benefit to the NHS, and some of that has to be, I think, financial.
Yeah, I mean, and I think NHS is very interested in that. We are exploring what that means. A bit to Piers' point, commercial for us generally means buying stuff. So we have lots of commercial people who are good at, but you work on buying stuff. We probably need to think about, new commercial models, and we are. But that is very interesting, and if you think it would help, then that helps us.
Yeah, I mean, we've started to look at a lot of different kind of collaboration models, and I think also taking a lot from industry in terms of innovation and how new ways of working, and open innovation was quite new in industry, and we experienced the same thing within NHS, and we can learn a lot from that, where actually it has to be a win-win partnership, and it's not just about the companies getting the benefit. There has to be feedback into the NHS as well.
Okay, I'm being told no more questions, but if anyone's got one quick question with it, that would be get a quick answer, and I'll get told off afterwards. Okay, gentleman there.
Journalist from the table. So I just had a quick question about the future of the NHS. Donald Trump.
That's a quick question.
There's no short answers in that one. Donald Trump recently said that the NHS have to be on the table for any future US UK trade deal. I just wanted to know from you, do you think that the NHS can come off that table?
Okay, so one word answer, NHS on the table in trade deals, one word answer, yes or no?
I try not to listen to too much of what Donald Trump says.
Is that a no?
No, that's my answer.
Yeah. Brilliant. Okay, listen, thank you very much to our panelists. That was really interesting. Thank you for your time, and thank you for doing what you do. Keep going. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, before you all disappear off, I just want you to stand. Please do so. Come in. Join the love party. So, now, all of you know, this has been a fantastic 3 days. I'm going to show you some magic slides in a minute. But before I do that, I'm conscious everybody's been standing. So in the true CogX and NHSX spirit of love, please stand up and give the person next to you a high five, a kiss, a hug. No kissing on the lips. Brilliant. Now, I've got you some slides to show about the CogXs. Guys, you hang out on the stage. Come on, let people see your beautiful faces. Everybody, please sit down. You've been awesome. Now, none of this would have been possible without some really, really fantastic people behind the scenes who made sure you were all warm, you were all dry, you could hear, you could be filmed and photographed and tweeted madly. I'd like to say a really, really, really massive thank you to the tech team here who've done some fantastic work. So a big hand, everybody, please. I'd also like to say a massive thank you to my team as well that's made this all possible. Tina, Anna, Jess, and everybody else who's been here. Thank you. This wouldn't have been possible without you. Thank you very much. And now, I'm just going to run through these slides. I'm not really sure what they say, but we'll find out. It'll be exciting. So, here's the 2030 vision. Global goals. Oh, we all know about these. Okay, fine. This is Cognition's X Knowledge Network. Just have a look. I mean, this is how you wing it, right? So, la 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 la, blah blah. No. So, have a look. CogX is brilliant. It's a festival, but they still have to make money. They still have to carry on. Go and have a look at this. And then come and meet the Next Generation Hackathon. It's starting in you got loads of time, 40 minutes. So let's not rush down there, but do go and have a look. These are some fantastic people doing some fantastic things. So this is from the CogX team, but also from all of us at NHSX. Thank you so much, and do come and grab these guys for some more in-depth chats if you want. You don't have to stay, obviously. But, you know, they're the ones doing it, and you're the ones who've made it happen. So thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.